This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. Bruchim Abam to the Koilel Mitzuyanim Tzadikim here in Kew Garden Hills, New York, as we continue the sixth part of our series on the tzava of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. So you're saying the sixth part, I called in, I'm on the radio, and I'm listening to a share on the sixth part. No, this is the best part of it, so you picked the right one. In part one, we discussed the family history of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. In part two, we discussed Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid himself. Part three, the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Part four, we discussed various supports and questions on the Rabbi Yehuda. And part five was the Shita of the Divrei Chaim. So now we're up to part six. We're going to discuss the Tshuvas of the Shem Aryeh, Rav Aryeh Leibish Bulchaver, who quotes the Rabbi Yehuda. It's number 18 on your sheets. And he quotes the Rabbi Yehuda saying that Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid only meant for his descendants. And says the Shem Aryeh, it's in number 18, about half the way down in number 18. The first word in line is Haprat. Many people say that tzava was only for his descendants. Therefore, we're not worried about whatever's written there. And they have who to rely on, which is the Rabbi Yehuda. But says the Shem Aryeh, if you look in the tzava Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid, you'll see it's not so. Because by some of the tzavas, he says, this is for my children. That implies that everything else is not for his children. So, v'makam hanemer stama kaya called him, means if he doesn't say it's going on everyone. He says a kohen can't live in Regensburg. If you look in the beginning, it says a kohen can't live in Regensburg. That means everything else is for Yisraelim. So he said, it's interesting that if you're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid only meant it for his descendants, but there's a Ramah. The Ramah actually quotes Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. Where does the Ramah quote Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid? Here, let me show you. One of the things Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid said was, you're not a shech the goose in Shvat. It's well known that you're not a shech the goose in Shvat. And since I'm not always clear what month it is, I never eat a goose. But Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid said, don't shech the goose in Shvat. Take a look on your sheets in number 20. The Ramah in Yoreh De'ah, Siman Yud Aleph Sif Dalet, says, Hine miksa shoichtim nizharin shaloi lishchayt shum avos b'teves u'shvat. Unless you eat from the heart. Mishum shekabbalah hi sheyesha achas loiz chadashim imsham va'avos yomos hashoichet. There's a Kabbalah, if you shecht a goose during that month, the shoichet will die. If he doesn't eat from the heart, okay. So what do we see from here? Clearly, Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid did not mean his descendants. If he did, the Ramah would not quote it, says the Shem Aryeh. Or, Siman Kuf Ayin Tes, he says, a Tarnagolis that's called Gavaris, he also quotes Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. Amnam, says the Shem Aryeh, that which Rabbi Yehuda asks on the tzava, that two brothers can't marry two sisters, and from there he proves that the Chassid, that the Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid is only talking to his children. Says the Shem Aryeh, no, that's not a proof from the Gemara, from the case of the 80 brothers who married 80 sisters. You could say, lahepach. You could say like this. Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid was talking to everyone. The Gemara says 80 brothers married 2 sisters. No! The Gemara was talking to the Klal. Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid was talking to the Klal. The Gemara is talking to the Prat. The Gemara is talking to the individuals. Because they knew, maybe the Chachmei Shas told them, you guys, it's okay if you marry brothers and sisters. Maybe they got a special heter.
And isn't it Svaradika to say that if the Gemara was talking to a Prat, they would have said so? If in the absence of saying to Prat, have to assume it applies to everybody.
So says the Shem Aryeh, it's just the opposite. It's more mistaber that the Chachmei Hashas, they knew a lot more than Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. But here's the big question. The big question is the fact that the Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid said, don't marry your niece, and in Shas, we say explicitly, it is a mitzvah. And says the Shem Aryeh, even if you're going to say that he only meant his children, even if he didn't mean his children, if it's a mitzvah to marry your niece, so then even if it would be a sakana for his children, shaymer mitzvah yada davara, like we find in Orach Chaim. So the Shem Aryeh says like this. Shem Aryeh says the same thing as the sons of Rav, that like the Gemara says in Yavamas, at first they said mitzvah yibum is kaidam, but now that they're not mechaven l'shem mitzvah, so mitzvah's chalitza kaidamas. So it comes out that shomer mitzvah yeda davara is only if you're mechaven l'shem mitzvah. But if you're not mechaven l'shem mitzvah, then your niece is going to be a problem. And therefore, for us, who there's a chash, maybe we won't be mechaven l'shem mitzvah, and there's a sakana, then you can't get married to these people. Meaning, maybe the Pshat and Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid knew it was a sakana. And the Gemara knew it was a sakana. But in times of the Gemara, you could overcome it by doing the mitzvah, but that's only if you're mechavin l'shem mitzvah.
What is the mitzvah? What kind of mitzvah is it?
To marry your niece.
Won't they have mitzvahs?
It's a nice mitzvah. It's a good thing to do.
Why? What does it say?
It darshans it from Pasuk in the Nevi'im. By the way, if you look in the Sefer Hasidim itself, he explains what's the reason to marry your sister's daughter. What's the reason? He says there's a klal. Most of one's sons will be like the wife's brother. There's a rule that most of one's children will be similar to one's wife's brother.
What if the wife doesn't have a brother?
Then you'll be similar to what he would have been if she had one. So that's what the Gemara says. Roiv banim doimim la'achei ha'im. Most children are like the brother or the mother. Therefore, we say like this: if you marry the daughter of your sister, listen carefully. Therefore, we say like this: then you're a chassid.
Like you.
Why? Because you'll have children. Mi bas achoisei, they'll be chasidim kamoisei. Right? Because Chazal say, hanoisei bas achoisei. You marry the daughter of your sister, is a chassid. He's a chassid. And when you have children, so they'll also be chassid. But what if the guy's a rasha, and he's mechavin lahanasei, then he'll just have rishayim. Meaning, what do we see from here? That the Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid himself says that if a guy is an oisvarf and he marries his sister's daughter, then he's going to have rotten kids.
What if his sister's daughter is a tzaddik? If the brother. We just said that the children.
No, so it depends. It depends what your kavan is. Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid says.
His children are going to be Rishoyim. Therefore, they shouldn't marry their sister's daughter.
So he says like this. He fears us like this. We're afraid that he commanded that you should not marry your sister's daughter because we're worried maybe you're not going to be mechavan lahanasai like by Yibam, and it could be a sakana. And the Gemara is talking about when you marry her l'shem mitzvah. This, says the Shem Aryeh, is clearly the pshat in the Sefer Hasidim, and all the questions on him are for naught. Basically, the Shem Aryeh defends the position of the Sanzer Rav, that there are no questions on the Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid from Shas. In the times of the Gemara, people had pure kavanos. Let's go back, says the Shem Aryeh, to the original issue of the tzava of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid, that if he in fact is correct, that there's a sakana, then why doesn't the Gemara talk about it? Why doesn't the Gemara bring it among all the things that are sakana and Shas? Why did it leave these out? And before Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid came along, where did it come from? It must be all of these sakanas and shas, it's an Isser Gomer. But these that Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid taught are far out chshashos. It could be it won't cause damage, even 1 out of 1,000, and therefore there's nothing to worry about. And if somebody violates it, we're not going to give you makas mardas. But Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid made mishmeres lemishmeres lefnei mishuras hadin b'derech eitzah. It's Mishnas Chasidim hu. And we're going to see uman deloy kapid loy kapdina b'hadei. This is going to be a very big klal. Rak hayar v'chor lenafshi v'choshu zeh tavei olav bracha. Means like this. Here's the question of Shem Aryeh. Really? It's taka danger to marry your sister's daughter? The Gemara says hundreds of things you shouldn't do because of danger. Why didn't the Gemara mention this? You know what the answer is? It's not really a danger. It's like a parent says to the kid, not only do I not want you to smoke, not only do I not want you to drink alcohol, I don't want you to drink regular Coca-Cola. Not only do I not want you to drink regular, I don't even want you to drink diet. Don't even drink orange juice, right? The doctor says. The worst, orange juice is terrible. It's the most harmful thing to drink. Why? Because the sugar, don't let your kids drink orange juice. It's very unhealthy. Nothing to do with acid. Sugar. The sugar turns into fat. And it causes diabetes. It's well known. So I have a question. If it's taka sakana to drink orange juice, why isn't there a Surgeon General warning on orange juice? This will cause diabetes.
Lobbying effort of the orange juice.
The answer is there's sakana and there's sakana. It's not like smoking. Smoking is an immediate danger. Sugar, it's more removed. You're not going to get a Surgeon General warning against. They'll still allow the schools to serve fruit juices. But it's dangerous, not healthy. Okay, so if you want to tell your kid, don't drink it, and your kid will actually listen to you, fine. But there's danger and there's danger. When the Gemara says something is dangerous, that means it's dangerous. Now, every parent has a right to say, I don't want you crossing the street unless you look 50 times. Do you really have to look 50 times? Isn't 3 times enough? Yeah, 3 times enough. But a parent could say, look 50 times. Now, the kid's not going to listen, but if you think the kid's going to listen, so you tell him, look 50 times. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid did. None of these things are really, really dangerous. It's like 1 out of 1,000. But, Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid cared about his children, so he said, don't do this, You never know. Hey, you never know.
The tzavah of Rabbi Yehuda doesn't talk about this to Bonim, when you still have to address that issue about those items that clearly he says.
Yeah, we asked that question.
In the absence of that,
we asked that question. Let's see, look at number 19 for a moment. He says this is the Sefer Chasidim. So besides the tzavah, Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid, appendage to that was the Sefer Chasidim. And he brings over here, on the pasuk, Ki yisischa achicha ben imecha, and it says, Mi yetencha ka'achli yonek shedei imi, roiv banim daimim la'achiyei. Most children are going to be like the wife's brother. Ulekach amru hanoisi bas achoisoi, v'hu chasid, if the uncle is a chasid, kishamal banim yibas achoisoi, or you chasim kamazim, neish roiv banim daimim la'achiyei. Avam yesh rasha, miskavin la'nosi, shiolai bas achoisoi yafeh, v'loi la'chol l'shem mitzvah ze'enoi toiv. So Yehuda Hachasid basically says explicitly the reason not to marry your niece is in order to be, because the person might not be mechavin l'shem mitzvah, and if a person's not mechavin l'shem mitzvah, it's taka going to be a problem. Now I want to show you something very interesting. Let's see if we could find it. By the way, just for a moment, the Rabbi Vadia doesn't buy this. Rav Vadia Bechlal does not buy this argument of the Shem Aryeh and the Sanzarav that the Gemara meant that it's a mitzvah to marry your niece when you're mechavin l'shem mitzvah, but if you're not mechavin l'shem mitzvah, it's a problem. Why doesn't he buy it? Because if you look in the Ramah, look at number 22, the Ramah explicitly paskins that it's a mitzvah to marry your niece. The Ramah says, mitzvah la'adam she'isa bas achoisai. V'yesh omer ma'af bas achiv. So the Ramah writes explicitly, it's a mitzvah. The Ramah repeats himself in Siman Tezvav. I, Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. What about the fact you can only be mechal l'shem mitzvah? Says the Ramah, I don't care. It's nothing to do with the shem mitzvah. And therefore that means the Ramah is paskening like the Noida of Yehuda. That Yehuda Hachasid did not mean this to his to the rest of Klal Yisrael. He only meant it to his descendants. Let me show you something very interesting. Let's see if we can find it here on the sheets. Let's see if we can find it. Let's see if we could find. Here's something very interesting. One of the questions that the Noida Yehuda asked on Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid was the fact that the Gemara says it's a mitzvah to marry your niece. For example, take a look at number 2 and number 3. The Gemara says, one who loves his neighbors, one who is makarev his relatives, one who marries the daughter of his sister, one who lends money to an ani b'shas dachkai, alav hakasav aimer, az tikra v'Hashem yaneh. So the Gemara is darshaning that it's a mitzvah, it's mamish a mitzvah to marry your niece. So Rabbi Vadia quotes something really interesting. See if we could find it. $47. You got it? Baruch Hashem. 51. Number 51. Number 51. And he brings over here the Shas Chuvas Makar Chayim, brings from the Sefer Sedeit Soifim and the Yabia Omer. He brings as follows. If anything, the Gemara is a raya to Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid against the Noida Yehuda. The Gemara says it's a mitzvah to marry your niece, and Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid says that you're not allowed to. You have to know how to read a Gemara. It says number 51, Shas Chuvas Makar Chayim. Do you have to worry about the Tzavar Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid? So he brings the Noida Yehuda that no, Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid was only being mitzvah his descendants. Says the Makar Chayim, I disagree. Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid was from the Balei HaTosfos. He had Ruach HaKodesh. You cannot just push away his words and say that he only meant his descendants. The Lashon HaMasha. The Gemara is a riot to Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. Why? Because the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan, when he got to this pasuk, he would cry. V'haya ki simsena oisai rois rabbis v'tzarais my rois v'tzarais Shmuel Amar zeh hamamtzi mois la'ani b'shas dachkai. It says, what does it mean, terrible tzaras? What are the tzaras that Rabbi Yochanan was crying about? Someone who lends money to an ani in his time of need. What does that mean, someone who lends money to an ani in his time of need? Meaning, he waits to give money to an ani until he needs it and not before. What does that mean? Listen carefully. That it says that Rabbi Yochanan would get up to the pasuk, Hashem is going to give you terrible tzaros. What are they? A guy who only lends money to an ani in his time of need, Hashem is going to give it to him. Because what took so long? Why do you wait for the guy to be b'tzara to lend him? He should have lent it before. So what do we see? Even though the Gemara, look in this Gemara. The Gemara says that all of these great mitzvahs, Hashem says, you're going to call out to me and I'm going to answer. And one of them is someone who lends money to an ani at his time of need. But that's a bad thing. That's right. It's a bad thing to lend money to an ani in his time of need. You should have done it sooner. And just like it's bad to lend money to an ani in his time of need, it's bad to marry your niece. But the Gemara promises reward. Hashem's going to listen to you. That's a punishment. Hashem's going to listen to you. Why is it a punishment? Because Hashem's only going to listen when you cry out. What about Terem Nikra of Shem Aryeh? That's the higher Madrega. That Hashem will answer your needs before you cry out. Nah, this Rasha who only lends money to Aniyim when they need it, this Rasha who marries his niece is going to be on the low level that Hashem will only answer his tefillos, but not preempt his tefillos. I mean, he completely flips around the Gemara. Pashib Shad, the Gemara is talking about a great guy. He lends money to an ani in time of need. He marries his niece. He loves his neighbors. He's Makar of his Kroivim. What a great tzaddik. No, he's a bad guy. But it says he's reward. No, it's not a reward, it's a punishment. Hashem will not answer him before he calls out, like other good Jews who give people money before they need it. So they say, this guy's a bad guy, he marries his niece. Yeah, what about the other ones? He loves his neighbors and he's Makar of his Kroivim. He's a bad guy! He only loves his neighbors! He doesn't like the guy down the block. He only is Makar of his Kroivim! Like the Hasidah. This is what Shas Shos Makar Chaim says.
That's stretching it. Who's stretching it?
Alma, Dama V'Lonim Shad Da'yeh Lo Yitzarus. So Mizavgon Hanos V'Asachoyse V'Ama V'Lonim Shad Da'yeh. To say they're both Saras. Meaning, and he won't be among those that it says about them, Terem Yikra V'Aniyana. But rather, Oz Tikra V'Hashem Yana. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid said, don't be that guy. Don't be the guy who only gives when they need it. Don't be the guy who only loves his neighbors, and not everybody. What does Rabbi Vadia have to say about this? Says Rabbi Vadia.
He's not going to accept that interpretation of the
Where are you reading?
No way.
I wrote that to Kiddush.
I don't think I put it on the sheet, but basically Rabbi Vadia says this is drush and it's not pashib shad it's not the correct shad in the Gemara. He's making me mitzvah avera and avera mitzvah. That's not the correct shot in the Gemara. Okay, back to the ranch. This is. Okay, let's look at number 23 and we'll end this session with that. Number 23 is back to the Shem Aryeh. Well, the Shem Aryeh says, V'nei al tzavos harav Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid, Rabim ro came to Mo. There are a lot of very far-fetched things, like it says a Kohen should not live in Regensburg, and a Lazar should not live in Regensburg, and a guy named Elazar, and a man and woman should not live in Avgashburg. That's why I try not to live there. Lo yoda Rav Behilberg. Don't take a Rabbanus in Hilberg. So he's like, why in the world should a Kohen not live in Regensburg? So you say maybe there's some kind of tumah that we don't know about there. But the other things are like, why not? Lazarus can't live in this city? So I heard from Rav Mordechai, now listen to this. I heard from Rav Manoach, Rav Mordechai Margolis of Satanav, that he had a tradition from his forefathers, that in the times of the Maharsha, there was a big asifa. Remember we talked about the asifa in the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara? There was an asifa in the times of the Maharsha. And the Maharsha got up and he stood on his feet and he said, I'm a descendant of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. And it says that in the Tzava Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid, nobody could call their son Shmuel or Yehuda. And my name is Shmuel, and my father's name is Yehuda. And I asked him why. Why are you not worried about the Tzava Yehuda Hachasid? And you know what the Maharsha said? Because we're not. That's my Kach Shamati Stam. Now, why, in fact, was Yehuda Hachasid makbel named Yehuda and Shmuel? Because Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid's name was Yehuda, and his father's name was Shmuel. His father's name was Shmuel Hanavi, like we find in Seder HaDoros, by the wondrous story with Rabbeinu Tam. And therefore he knew he didn't want anyone to be named after him. By the way, Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman also left in his tzava that people should name after him. And he knew whoever would be named after would not be successful. It could be the Maharsha and his father were not named after him. They had the name from somebody else. That's why they weren't worried. Or it could be the tzava was only mamish for his children, not for his grandchildren, great-grandchildren. But what do we see from here? And the Maharsha was a long time after. He says, "V'Rav Maharsha hayizman Rav Achrav ve'iflag kama doros al zeh." Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid didn't mean many generations later. Lamaisa, what he's saying is that even the descendants of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid themselves were not so makbid, but says the Shem Aryeh, we can't rely on stories. Stories are not support to follow halacha. People like to say, I know what halacha is, but I once saw this and this. First of all, it never happened. You didn't see it. Most things people think they saw, they never even saw. They would like to have seen it, and therefore they convince there's a psychological phenomenon where people like to think they see things, and therefore they did see that, even though loy haya v'loy nivra. So therefore, the Shem Aryeh says you do not rely on a story. You can't prove anything from a story. Okay, so Mar Rabbi, this segment. So we discussed. There's another way to read the Gemara in Sanhedrin and Yevamis about marrying your niece. We discussed this story, this legend about the Maharsha, that supposedly the Maharsha himself was not makbid about the tzava of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. And let us see just a little bit more. Okay? If you take a look over here at number 26, there's a sefer called Divrei Ze'ev, which is a kuntras that has old manuscripts of tshuvas. And now Rabbi said there's a shaila if Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid even wrote the tzava of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. Okay? So now that's the next. That's the next. Should we make another share about that? Should we cut it and then? I'm not letting you go then. Okay, so we're cutting it right here. Cut it and then we have another. Okay.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.